Welcome back to another episode of the Big Apple and Broad Street Sports Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Brandon Pockris, joined by my co-host, as always, Luke Milai. Luke, how are you doing on this fine evening?
Doing good, man. I just served ice cream for 9 hours. Now I get to talk to you for another hour. So it can't get any better than this.
I mean, I'd say talking to me is even better than ice cream, but I mean, it's up for debate. I'm not entirely sure. Depends on the day, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so before we get started, just wanted to tell the entire audience the YouTube page is up and running. Last week's episode is up on the page. So if you want to see our beautiful faces while you're listening to the podcast, hey, that's an option for you. But as always, the episode is up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you can listen to any podcast. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. But without further ado, let's jump right into our first topic. And that first topic is it surrounds a certain NFL wide receiver that has been making a decent number of headlines recently. So if you follow a lot of football, like myself and Luke, you would know that Julio Jones has been on the block for a little bit. There were rumors swirling around that Atlanta wanted to trade him before the draft. His contract is a very big number, and that number is something that Atlanta wants to shed because they're approaching a rebuild. They need to revamp a team that has been picking in the top 10 of the draft 2 of the past 4 years. They have an aging Matt Ryan, and Julio's contract is actually very easy to move after this year. And after June 1st, it is even easier to move than it would be before. This whole situation was expedited after a impromptu phone call was made on, I think the show's name's Undisputed on Fox Sports 1, but
Yeah, you got it.
Shannon Sharp called Julio Jones and he said, basically, I'm out of there. And he had to throw a jab at the Cowboys because of Skip Bayless. He said he wasn't going to Dallas. But that really has made everything more public, and inspired by that, I wanted to dive deep into some potential fits and really what teams would be best suited to take on a player and contract like Julio Jones. So, Luke, after all the public craziness that has been going on with Julio and what has been really occurring with him the past few months now, what's a team that you would like to see him go to, or even some teams you would like to see him go to? And then on the other hand, what do you think is the most likely destination for him at the end of the day?
Well, I'm going to talk about two teams. And when I looked up the odds for who's most likely to get Julio if he does leave Atlanta, the top two teams were the Patriots and the Titans. And I think with the Patriots, they're at minus 150 on some sports books right now for Julio to go there. I think that would be incredible for them because we know, obviously, when the Tom Brady era ends, you have a lot of things you got to fix. And one of the biggest issues for this team was passing the ball. And it could be a little bit of Cam Newton couldn't get the ball down the field, but this team also ran the ball a lot because Cam Newton is their main guy. I expect them to try and become more of a pass-first offense with Mac Jones now. And the best thing to do for young guys to make him as comfortable as possible, that's stuff like beefing up the offensive line and then going out and getting him weapons. There's no better weapon than Julio Jones. And we know the Patriots have a lot of money this offseason. They made that very clear with all the signings they've already made in free agency. I think this is they could pull off, and that's something that I think would benefit them a lot and benefit Mac Jones. Not necessarily to maybe getting back to their really winning ways, but I think it's something that could be great for the development of Mac Jones and getting him to where the Patriots would like him to be in the future.
Yeah, and looking at the whole Julio Jones situation in my eyes, I mean, this is a guy 32 years old, obviously. Really big injury history. I know if you play fantasy football, you would know that it seems like Julio's always out half the year, but this is a guy at his size and just athletic freak he is. He deals with lower body injuries, upper body injuries. There's usually always something nagging him during the year. But at the end of the day, this is still Julio Jones we're talking about. This is still a top 5 wide receiver when healthy. When fully healthy, you could argue he's top 3. He makes every play you could ask him to. He outjumps people, outruns people. And really, the main thing that I'm taking away from the whole Julio Jones situation is that it has to be a contender that trades for him. It needs to be a team that, yeah, you got to make the cap room work, but it's also got to be a team that's ready to win now. So, like, I'll give you an example. As much as I would like the New York Jets to trade for Julio Jones, at this current juncture, Julio wants to win right now. As much as I'd love to say it and love to think that the Jets are at that spot, they're not. They're coming off a 2-win season, have a new head coach, new quarterback, new basically everything. This is not a team that is in the right spot to trade for a wide receiver and contract at that position like Julio Jones. So what are some teams that I would like to see Julio land on? Obviously, you brought up New England, Luke. That's not where I want to see him. As good as I think he would be in that offense, I wanted him to have a more consistent option at quarterback. First option I have is Baltimore. Regardless of people's opinions in the media and really just overall, Lamar Jackson can throw the ball. He has shown that he can do it. But the main struggle, if you really have watched a lot of Ravens games, specifically in the playoffs, is that there is not an alpha option for him. Marquise Brown has been Jackson's number 1 receiver. And I'm not discounting Marquise Brown as a playmaker, as a receiver. He's a very good player in the NFL, and he's very good at what he does. Marquise Brown is not a 6'5" or 6'3", whatever Julio Jones' height is. He's not a tall, athletic wide receiver that can go up over people and make plays. Brown's a very athletic wide receiver that is more the run after the catch and speed threat. He's not the guy that's going to make plays in the red zone and be that outside target for Lamar that if Baltimore landed him, you could be looking at them as a Super Bowl contender because now there's that finally that element in the offense where it's not such an easy, oh, we can sell out to stop this aspect and we're not going to get burned. No, if you sell out to stop the run, now you're giving up one-on-ones to Julio Jones, which you never want to do. I mean, we've seen what happens when a team strictly goes one-on-one. Julio Jones goes for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. A second option that I really like personally is the Tennessee Titans. And yes, they have the second highest odds in some sports books in some places. Adding him to A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry, we're talking about making Baltimore unstoppable. That would make Tennessee borderline unstoppable. And for fantasy purposes too, that makes Ryan Tannehill one of the most appealing quarterbacks in the league. Because if you're a defense, who are you selling out to stop? Julio Jones, A.J. Brown, or Derrick Henry? There's not really a way to stop all 3. You're leaving someone unattended for. And Tennessee's offense, despite losing Arthur Smith, ironically, to Atlanta, would still be a very good to extremely good offense. And that would just be incredible to see. And the third option, it's a little bit far-fetched, but can we get Aaron Rodgers some help? Like, imagine if he had Julio Jones and Devontae Adams. Imagine he won the MVP this year. He would be a threat to repeat next year with Julio and Devontae and Aaron Jones in that backfield and under Matt LaFleur's offense. That's a Super Bowl contender again. That is the help Aaron Rodgers would want. That's the type of guy he would want to have. Now, obviously, I say it's far-fetched because the contract, the salary cap issue, that I don't know if that would work for Green Bay. I'm not a salary cap expert. I haven't really dug deep into that. I from what I've seen, I don't think it's a realistic option, but it's kind of like my fantasy football pipe dream scenario as at 13. But I've said my teams that I would really love to see him on. Luke, you've said yours. Where do we think is the most likely option that Julio Jones is playing for next year? Like, what team is he most likely going to be suiting up for?
I mean, I think you made a good point when you said it has to be a contender. And I thought the teams you named are all the most likely teams seemingly thought throughout the media and the sports books and just from experts. People think those are really the main teams. The teams that could need that receiver to go above and beyond and really make that leap. Like a team like the Titans that were the AFC Championship a couple years ago, won their division last year, and got knocked out of the playoffs early. But are they a Julio Jones away? Are the Ravens, who now have a great Browns team in their division, an up and coming Bengals team that shouldn't be a threat this year, maybe next year, but they got to start to commit to Lamar. Lamar's now 4 or 5 years in, and he's still yet to have a weapon, as you mentioned. So Julio would be great for them. So I think I just like what you said about the contenders getting Julio, but I want to bring up like a bit of a devil's advocate thing really quick for the Titans. I was talking to our former guest, Noah Fisher, and I was talking with him about Julio. He mentioned the Titans possibly almost being a waste of money for Julio. And on the surface, that seems kind of weird because it's Julio Jones. But I started to look more into it. This is a Titans team that obviously they have A.J. Brown, another big receiver. This is an offense that averaged over 30 points. And that was without Julio. So you can almost think Ryan Tannehill had career highs in touchdowns, QBR, his second best year in interceptions, one of his best year in yards. Should they go and just use that money somewhere else? And for the Titans, I don't think they're a Julio Jones away from the Super Bowl. I think whatever faulted them in the playoffs last year, I don't think it was the lack of having another receiver. I could be wrong if you have any other thoughts to that. I think for them it might make more sense to go out and use that money elsewhere. But if you get Julio Jones, no one's going to come out and say it was a bad move. But I guess we'll see. I'm just really excited to see who gets him because it'll be a show no matter what.
I do completely understand where Noah is coming from and you're coming from on that because the two glaring holes, and yes, Tennessee tried to address these in the draft, were offensive line at the tackle spot and guard spot and edge rush. So yeah, I would I'd rather see the Titans dedicate money towards shoring up those areas. Yeah, of course, but I think that especially when you have AJ Brown himself clamoring for Julio and other guys on the Titans wanting him on the team, I mean, that could end up being like the locker room wants this guy. We have an opportunity. We should probably go do this. Two other far-fetched options I would like to see, and then I'll say who I think he'll end up on. The Arizona Cardinals, if Hopkins and Julio were on the same team with AJ Green and Kyler Murray, one, I don't know how any of those guys are approaching 1,000 yards plus unless Arizona just doesn't run the ball next year. And two, how would a defense ever stop that offense? I mean, you can't double Hopkins and Julio because then you would leave the middle of the field wide open or leave the slot threat wide open. I mean, they just drafted Rondale Moore, who was one of the most explosive wideouts in the class. And like I said, they have AJ Green. So if Arizona was able to land Julio, which it's a possibility. I mean, no one thought they had a shot for JJ Watt and they got him. So I think that'd be they'd be a fun team to play within Madden. I'll just say that. And just as a joke, the last one, if he found his way to the Kansas City Chiefs,
stop.
I
Don't
mean,
ever say that. Don't ever say that.
I mean, imagine Tyreek Hill and Julio Jones on the same field,
And Travis
and Travis
Kelsey.
Kelsey. I think
No, I do not
at
want to
that
imagine
point,
that.
I think at that point the opposing defense is calling timeout, walking off the field, and just forfeiting, because if you thought Arizona was hard to defend, imagine Julio Jones with Tyreek Hill, those weapons, in an Andy Reid offense. We don't even know if Cliff is a insane offensive mind. We know what Andy Reid is, and Andy Reid would basically be in his paradise swimming around with all those weapons. But shifting back to a more really quote unquote serious dialogue, I think that Tennessee, or I guess New England, are the most likely options at this juncture. I mean, they're the two ones that consistently pop up. They're the two ones that seem to have dealt with Atlanta in the past. I mean, there's precedent for New England trading for Atlanta wide receivers. We saw so with the Mohamed Sanu trade a few years back. I mean, it's really interesting because there isn't a single team right now that stands out as a favorite. I mean, yeah, obviously the odds are in those two teams' favors, but we've seen how quickly that can flip. And honestly, I'm just excited for that entire process. And it should be interesting because as we approach June 1st, there should be more action and movement on that front. And there was reports in the past few days that said that a Julio Jones trade could be imminent. So we're going to keep our eyes open, our ears listening, and if there's something that breaks, we'll be the first ones to relay that news. But transitioning, as I get my English straight once again, to just some OTA, just training camp almost talk. I wanted to just bring up some stuff about the Jets. Zach Wilson, from what I've seen, what I've read, just scouring my Jets information from the people I follow that could do this for a living. Well, obviously want to reach that point one day, but just looking at these people, it seems like Zach Wilson is really a lot more comfortable than I think Darnold ever was. It seems like the ball has a lot more zip out of his hand. Yes, it's 7-on-7s and all that, but it seems like Wilson is barely throwing any incompletions. It seems like he's very comfortable with Keelan Cole already, which is a very interesting connection considering Cole was slated to be like the fifth wide receiver on this team or fourth wideout on this team. And it's very exciting that it seems like Wilson is getting more and more comfortable with being a NFL quarterback and handling all the responsibility and things that come with that. The other part about the Jets, though, just thinking more about it, and this isn't even about what's going on in training camp or OTAs. I am very confident in Robert Saleh as a coach. I think he'll do wonders for the defense, but I'm kind of worried about their cornerback group. Not safeties, because obviously you still have Marcus May, you have Ashton Davis, but that cornerback group, I mean, your best returning guy is Bryce Hall. I mean, obviously you cut Pierre Desir after that signing didn't work out. You still have Blesson Austin. You still have some other under the radar guys, but it's definitely the weakest position group on their team. And I feel like they need to add someone in fast. I mean, obviously, after the June 1st deadline, that quote unquote second wave of free agency, you could probably see him sign a guy like Steven Nelson or Richard Sherman. I think that's imperative for this team. I think that they need to get a cornerback in the building one way or another, because as good as Robert Saleh is, you need more. I don't want to say talent on a cornerback side, but it's kind of boiling down to that. I mean, I feel like there's just not enough there yet. And I think it's been like that the whole time, but being so focused on landing the right quarterback and getting help for the offense, now that we're at this point, the glaring need for the team is becoming cornerback. And listen, you can't solve every problem in a single offseason. So if that's the only thing the Jets really need to address before the year and after the year, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. They've added so much already. So, and obviously, as you said, they're not going to be able to fix everything coming from the 2-win team that they were. So it's good to see that things are going up, though. That's what you got to do. And now for the Eagles, not a ton of new information has come out since last week, but a couple of things that I noticed that I thought were pretty interesting. Brandon Brooks, he's says he's good to go coming off another torn Achilles. He'll be 32 by the time the season starts. Lane Johnson, he's going to be 31 by the time the season starts. And these are two guys that were injured last season. We know the problems the Eagles had with the offensive line, gave up the most sacks in the league for most of the season. I don't know if it ended that way, but they were pretty bad. And they had a lot of backups. The Eagles had 13 or 14 different offensive line combinations last year, which is not a recipe for success at all. So I think it's good to see these guys coming back. Brandon Brooks, Brandon actually claimed that if the Eagles had made the playoffs, he would have played, which would have meant he would have came back from Achilles surgery in less than 7 months, which he's done before, which is really interesting. He came back very early from his last Achilles tear, and he had like the highest rated season of his career as a right guard. And who knows, maybe that trend will continue. He'll play ridiculous again this season. But I think I always talk about getting your young quarterback and your young guys comfortable and weapons, and it all starts with the offensive line. So if Brooks and Lane healthy, that's going to be huge for Jalen, and it's really going to give the Eagles a chance to really evaluate Jalen Hurts and see what he has. And speaking of Jalen Hurts and evaluating him, I'm kind of annoyed and confused as to why he hasn't been named starter yet. It just I don't know. I feel like it almost shows a lack of trust, even though everybody in the world knows Jalen Hurts is going to start. There's no way if they trot Joe Flacco out there week one, Brandon. I mean, this place will explode. Like, what's the point of holding back? I think it'd be one thing if Jalen Hurts seemed like a guy that didn't care, didn't seem like he was putting the work in, or didn't want to compete. But like he says all the right things. It looks like he's a good leader. This is all from the outside. He says all the right things. He looks like a good leader. He looks like and sounds like a guy that the rest of the team really respects. We've seen a ton of quotes from all his receivers talking him up so much. I don't think you need to play this camp competition game with him and Joe Flacco. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, just give him the title. He's working hard enough, and I don't think pretending there's a competition really benefits anyone. I don't know how you feel about that, but it just kind of confuses me because we know Joe Flacco's not going to start, and Jalen Hurts is working hard. So I just don't get it.
So to really not elaborate, but really talk about the two things you brought up, I think people really forget how good that Eagles O line was when everybody's healthy, and that's the key here. It's healthiness. It's can they all stay on the field together? Remember, one of the main reasons Carson Wentz was at that MVP caliber in 2017 was because the entire O line stayed healthy.
Mm-hmm.
After that season, everything kind of started to fall apart. I mean, it wasn't all at one time, but you would have two guys go down here, and then they come back, and then two other guys would go down. And then last year, you literally had everybody on the offense.
Everybody go down.
Hurt. So, listen, I really do agree with what Brooks is saying. Like, yeah, I think he could come back and be an all-pro level again. I do think that this Eagles O-line could be one of the best in the league. So it's just a matter of health. It's a matter of can they do it for the entire year and can they stay on the field? And with it being 17 games now, 18 weeks, 17 games, and then playoffs, it's going to be very hard for not just the Eagles, but every team to have a full clean bill of health. And the war of attrition that is the NFL is going to be even much more so this year. And then with the whole Jalen Hurts thing, I feel like this is just a matter of coach speak. It's a guy that's a new head coach. He's probably brought up and raised in his coaching that, oh, you don't want to reveal too much in the media, too much in the press. Got to keep things close to the vest. You can't reveal everything. I mean, how many times do we see this nowadays, right? Oh, the quarterback. Oh, we want to sit him for the whole year. We want to make him develop. And then by week 4, he's your starting quarterback for the rest of the year. Or, oh, this running back. Yeah, we want to split carries and oh, he's going to be the main guy for this week. And then all of a sudden, he plays one snap or a series and then doesn't see the field. I mean, it's just another instance of this coach speak and this just jargon that, I mean, every sport has it. I mean, look at baseball. I mean, Joe Girardi comes out and says there's nothing wrong with Bryce Harper. 2 days later, Bryce Harper goes on the IL. What's his reasoning? Oh, we don't want to give teams a competitive advantage. This is in every single sport, no matter where you turn, no matter where you look. Coaches, they always want to try to outsmart their opposition, other coaches. And I'm going to fire off a hot take here. I've played sports for a long enough time where I've seen some of this, I haven't seen all of it. I think it's just stupid. The whole coach speak, it's just stupid. Like, as a fan, I just respect it more when a coach gets straight to the point and just says, yeah, this is what we're doing. He's our guy. And yes, that can be a lie too, but things change. Things change. If you're in an off season where you didn't have a great year, obviously everyone knows there's a chance you're going to move on from your quarterback. But when you're in the Eagles situation and the options are between Jalen Hurts and Joe Flacco, and you're not committing to your guy, unless you're trading for Deshaun Watson or Aaron Rodgers or an all-pro quarterback, why aren't you naming Hurts the starter? And if you traded for Deshaun Watson right now, that would be a whole different set of issues that really wouldn't be great to talk about at any point. And if you trade for Aaron Rodgers, be a whole nother set of issues because why would you even be looking into that with a roster you have? So it's just a matter of what the team that is around Hurts right now, there's literally like less than a percent chance that he isn't the starter. So I think in my opinion, I think it's in Sirianni's best interest to just say, yes, Jalen's our guy. No more questions about that. Ask me about anything else about this team except quarterbacks.
Well said.
Yeah. And on that note, it's time to transition to the sport that is really going on right now. It's been going on for a while and it's in its playoffs. No, we're not talking about hockey, which we need to do a little more on this show, but we're not doing that today. We're talking about basketball. And with most series being at the midpoint or actually being close to done, in one case at least, me and Luke felt that it'd be great to just do some quick hits on some of the series and just run through all of them, say our little piece, and not really elaborate too much because we want to save that for when the series are over, give a full blown analysis. What happened? What do we think went wrong for the team that lost? What do we think went right for the team that won it? And how can they keep it moving essentially for the next series that they're going to be in? So, without further ado, Luke, why don't you kick us off and say the first series that we're going to be covering?
Yeah, the Sixers and Wizards. And Sixers, fortunately for me, are up 2-0 right now. It hasn't really been too competitive. Game 1 was sort of close towards the end, but I think the Sixers have been in control of the series, and I think they'll continue to be in control. And we knew going into it, Joel Embiid was going to get his. I mean, Alex Len, Daniel Gafford, like these guys can't guard Joel Embiid. He's going to get his points. He's going to get doubled. He's going to get points for other guys. So it was really on those other guys. And I think Tobias Harris scored 37 in game 1. Ben Simmons averaged triple-double the last 2 games. That's what needed to happen. And I don't want to get too impressed because this is a 1 seed versus an 8 seed. The Sixers should win the series pretty handily, but it is very good to see that outside of Joel Embiid, the other guys are continuing what they did in the regular season because Joel Embiid was an MVP candidate, but the Sixers aren't the 1 seed without the production and Tobias and the rest of the team and the role players. So it's good to see, at least for now, they're continuing it. And Russell Westbrook questionable for game 3 after I believe it was his ankle that he hurt as he was walking off the floor in game 2. So Sixers should continue this into game 3, go up 3-0, and this thing shouldn't make it back out of Washington.
Listen, I'm going to keep it short, sweet, and right to the point. The Sixers are exactly who we thought they were. They are one of, if not the best team in the Eastern Conference. I think a lot of people are still sleeping on them and really don't understand how good of a team they actually are. They are absolutely dominating Washington in and out, every single aspect of the game. And the fact that, yes, it is a 1 versus 8, but Philly is building their momentum. They aren't stalling out of the gate and having to pick up the pieces. No, they're going right for the throat off the bat. And I'm going to be completely honest with them facing down the winner of the Atlanta Hawks and New York Knicks series. I don't think that team really stands a chance because those two teams are going to be so exhausted, whatever one advances, because that series, we'll get to that whenever, but that series has been so tightly contested that if Philly executes the sweep like I think they're going to, one, the Hawks or Knicks are not going to be rested enough to face down that team. And two, I don't think either team has anybody that can cover Embiid, Simmons together or even by themselves. So that's my thoughts on the Sixers series. So Luke, what's the next one we got?
Next one is the Knicks and Hawks, and that's your team, buddy. I'll let you take this one first.
So I've watched basically every game in this series. The fact that it's only 2-1 is incredible. I did predict the Knicks to win the series in 6. Don't think that's going to happen now. But I always felt that this was going to be the closest series, if not one of the closest series in the entire playoffs. The Knicks and Hawks played each other very closely during the regular season every single time they played. There was never a lackluster game between the teams. And really, what it's coming down to right now is Julius Randle, RJ Barrett. The Knicks offense is just not executing the same way it was in the regular season. It's not saying that they're playing really any worse overall as a team. They're still playing pretty good defense. Obviously, tonight they lost, but Atlanta shot basically 64% from 3. They were not missing from deep. Felt like every time they released the ball, it was going in. The Knicks shot basically 35% from the field as a whole. The Knicks could not have played any worse, and yet the Knicks only lost by 13. I think that on Sunday, the Knicks are going to bounce back. They are going to tie the series. And I think this series, just looking at from where it is right now, if the Knicks get any semblance of shooting back, this series is going 7. I think it's going 7 easy. On Atlanta side, Trae Young is exactly the superstar that everyone has considered him. As much as I dislike him right now, and as much as I'll probably dislike him in the future, you cannot discount how good of a player he is. The bravery and just aggression to continuously attack the paint and fire up floaters and then dish out to Bogdanovich or Gallinari or Hunter to continuously hit threes. This is a team with an extremely dangerous offense. They are, like the Knicks, a very young team. That's why I said last week that these are two teams I could see consistently playing each other and building a insane rivalry over the next decade because of the trajectory both these teams are on and how young they are. But overall, it's been an amazing series. The Knicks are, in my opinion, are playing with house money. They were never supposed to be here in the playoffs. And really, this is a season that they can build off of, that they can take what worked, take what didn't work, and hopefully land a star and move on to bigger and better things in the years to come. But overall, it's been an insanely fun series to watch.
Yeah, it's been really good. I haven't gotten to watch too much of this series, but from what I've seen, it is, as you said, one of the most competitive ones. And I really don't think it wouldn't be a surprise to me if the Knicks come out and win game 4. I mean, Julius Randle, he hasn't been the guy that he was in the regular season. And it's a whole different animal when you are the main guy on a team on your first playoff run. And now the whole team opponent is game planning for you. I mean, that's something that I'm sure Julius Randle has not seen in maybe since his college, maybe his high school days, where he's the guy getting game planned for. So I think he'll finally get it all together, because I know he struggled the first 3 games. The Knicks, I mean, they won game 2. In game 1, they were right there at the end. They lost on a fluke in the final second. So other than this little miscue here, I think the Knicks come back and win game 4. I think this game is huge though, because if the Knicks fall down 3-1, I don't have a shot. And if they get this to 2-2 going back to Madison Square Garden, that's when you really see things turn towards the Knicks' favor. So this obviously, we're saying this about every game in the series from this point on, but this is the most important game of the next season. Like, if they don't win this game, the season's pretty much over. I know 3-1's not a guarantee, but they've got to go get this one. And I think they can. I think Julius has to step it up. I liked them throwing Derrick Rose and Taj Gibson into the starting lineup, by the way, because we can agree the Knicks needed more offense. As good as they are on defense, still stay that good, but they needed offense. You mentioned Derrick Rose put up 30 tonight, so that's big for them. That's something that's going to need to do, along with Julius Randle picking it up. But now we're going to move on to the Bucks and the Heat, and this one, 3-0 Milwaukee. This is almost a foregone conclusion. So something that I want to talk about before you get into it is starting guard Donte DiVincenzo being out of the playoffs, which I think is pretty significant for them. He's another one of those guys that can guard and hit threes. That's what this Bucks team is all about. I mean, you're surrounding 3 terrific defenders in Giannis, Chris Middleton, and Drew Holiday with an athletic guy like Donte DiVincenzo. I don't know how teams are supposed to score on the perimeter. That's how good they've been. So I think that almost gives them a weak point in the defense, as good as those other guys are and as good as Brook Lopez has been protecting the rim. So we'll see how that is for them going into the rest of the rounds. And as for this series, Milwaukee got a lot better this year. I know this was a pick that people thought could be an upset because Miami did do it last year and had that sort of defense regarding Giannis. They knew how to do it, but adding Drew Holiday was huge for offense and defensive reasons. He's incredible. He's a huge piece to be their third best option. And then I mentioned Donte even until now. They got Bryn Forbes in the offseason, Dave Tucker. These are all guys that just suit their roles so well for this Bucks team. And Giannis and Chris Middleton have been playing very well. And I think that continues. I mean, I think this series ends in game 4. I think Milwaukee caps off this sweep.
Yeah, I'm disappointed in Miami. I mean, this was the upset pick I actually felt pretty good about. I felt like Miami finished out the year on a decent note, but what I didn't expect was Jimmy Butler to really just seemingly regress and just fall off a cliff this series. I didn't expect Bam Adebayo to essentially be non-existent. I don't know what's happened to Tyler Hero. It's just everything that worked for Miami in that bubble run really has just not been there. And to think that Miami shut down a James Harden trade because they didn't want to get rid of Tyler Hero. Imagine saying, like, Luke's laughing right now. For those on YouTube that can see, he's dying of laughter right now. Imagine saying to a Heat fan, yo, you could have James Harden right now. You just have to give up Tyler Hero and a few other pieces. Before you could finish that sentence, they would say yes. it just shows that I guess it was a recency bias, and I guess I was a bit of a victim of that too. Did we just completely overestimate the Heat and really completely just overvalue what they did in the bubble and that type of environment? Because who knows? It might have just been the Cinderella story, and now everything's just coming back to reality. I mean, Luke, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say they were overestimated, but really the Heat are kind of who they were. The Heat were a fifth seed in last year's postseason. They're a sixth seed this year. I mean, not a lot has changed, and I think people said, well, they're a playoff team. They just got to get to the playoffs. Which, I mean, they are in the right to have that expectation. They went to the finals last year, but I think looking back on it, the bubble it was great the fact that we got the NBA playoffs, but the bubble in itself, it seemed to benefit teams like the Heat that weren't going to have home advantage. That like I feel like the Heat had a much better chance at neutral site games than going on the road into Milwaukee, into Boston, like all these places they would have gone and had to play really high intensity games. Now they're playing them in a neutral site in front of no fans. I think that's something that really benefited the Heat, and which almost as a testament to the Lakers, the fact that they were the one seed, didn't get any playoff home games, and still went on to win the championship. That's impressive. But on this series alone, the Heat, I think they are who they were last year. They're just struggling in the big games because they just didn't do it all season, and it's very hard to do it in the playoffs when you didn't do it during the regular season. Like you can't just flip a switch, and that's what they tried to do for the second year in a row, and they couldn't. But
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I think that's
just
all.
yeah. No, I'm just saying it's just very interesting to see that it seems like the Heat have just fallen from the graces of really just everybody, and I'm interested to see where that path leads down.
Yeah. And now moving on to the next one, Nets and Celtics. I'm watching the end of the Nets and Celtics as we speak, and Marcus Smart just drew a questionable offensive foul against Kevin Durant as this game is pretty much winding down. Kyrie Irving, I can read his lips. He's saying that's a flop. That's a flop. As it goes the other way. It looks like the Celtics are about to win. So this will be a 2-1 series by the time this is posted. So it'll be a 2-1 series. I predicted a net sweep. I was not expecting this, but Brandon, the Celtics are winning because Jason Tatum has scored 50 again. The last time the Celtics won, Jason Tatum scored 50. It's looking like for the Celtics to win, Jason Tatum is going to need to score 50 points. And we were talking about this a bit before. I just don't think he can sustain this. And obviously 50 points is a very unsustainable number, but in a series where you're playing the likes of Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving, that's the only realistic way you'll have a chance. And even with Harden having 40, Kevin Durant having over 30, Jason Tatum and the Celtics are hanging. So you got to give them credit. I think a lot of people expected a sweep, especially with how handily the Nets took care of business in Brooklyn. So you got to give Boston credit. But I think it's too early, and it would be way too reactionary to say that, for me at least, that Boston is going to make a run back into the series. I think this is still going to be short and sweet for Brooklyn.
I mean, listen, I was of the thought that Boston would get one. I didn't think that it would be a clean sweep. Obviously, it was a realistic possibility, but Jason Tatum is becoming that type of player where really it's basically every other night he's going for 30 plus, and that 30 plus can balloon into 50 and become just team carrying. I mean, if Jalen Brown was back, I'd say the Celtics would have potential to win two. I mean, I don't think they would, but Brown adds so much both on offense and defense that his loss for Boston really it essentially took them out of the playoff hunt in the back half of the year. And it hurt them. And I think that regardless of the win tonight, this is still the Brooklyn Nets. This is still Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant. Now, with that being said, if Tatum somehow goes for 50 again and the Celtics tie the series, then I think people are going to come out and say, what are the Celtics doing that the Nets cannot stop? If Boston is able to take a second game, I think that's when the conversations start to happen. And I think if that does happen, Philly or Milwaukee is going to see something in that and be able to exploit that. Maybe not in the semis, but definitely in the Eastern Conference Finals. I think this is really, I don't want to say it's not the first adversity this Brooklyn Nets team has faced this year because they've barely played with their big three, right? But this is the first time they're playing in the playoffs together. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to a loss. Maybe certain people in the media saying certain things. Oh, maybe this Nets team isn't what we thought they were, which obviously it's one game, but the media is going to be the media, and certain people are going to overreact to one game. But I don't think the Nets are in trouble. Now, like I said, if it got to two somehow, then I think it would start to be okay, let's pump the brakes on Brooklyn now. What's going on? But in order for that to happen, Jason Tatum's essentially going to have to go God mode and turn into Wilt Chamberlain on steroids. And he did that tonight. But if he's able to sustain that over an entire rest of the series, listen, that would put him on like LeBron caliber. I mean, he's doing LeBron caliber things circa 2000 era Cleveland Cavaliers with Anderson Varejao and that roster. I mean, literally, that's the only way Boston has won recently when Tatum is having 50-point games. It's honestly incredible.
Wow, and they just showed Kemba Walker is 3 for 14 with 6 points, so he is not giving them anything. And they're still up 7 with 25 seconds left, so that's pretty impressive for them. But yeah, it's a good point. We're not going to react. Who knows? Maybe the Celtics will pull off 4 straight, and we'll look like idiots. But that's all right. This was a good game. I think we addressed that one pretty well. Now we're going to move to the West. Utah and Memphis. And I think we were both a little off going into the one because we didn't even think Memphis would be in this position. We both thought the Warriors were going to win that play-in game and make it to the playoffs like Utah. And it's been this series for me is tough to gauge because in game one we saw no Donovan Mitchell. So how good was Utah really? And Memphis went out there and took advantage and they won. And then game two, you see Ja Morant score 47 points and Utah still win. So it's been a little back and forth. I mean, you have to favor the 1 seed in this situation. The Jazz have done it all year. They have the best record in the NBA. But I think going back home, I can see if Memphis can split at home, like that's the biggest thing. They keep this thing close. They cannot afford to fall down by 2 games in this series. They can keep it close. That's the biggest thing. And for them, it's team defense. I mean, that's what I watched in their wins in the playing game and their win in game 1 of the series. When they're playing good defense, that's when this team really steps up. We know Ja Morant can score, and we know Ja Morant can get all of his teammates a ton of baskets. So I think for them, if they can defend well against Mitchell and the plethora of scorers and 3-point shooters the Jazz team has, that's where they have their shot. It starts on the defensive end. Not sure if they have it. Just when Donovan Mitchell's out there and then Jordan Clarkson, who won 6-man, we'll talk about that. But he scored about 20. He averages over 20 points. Ingles averages around 20 points. Rudy Gobert is one of those defenders in the league. This is a very good Jazz team. They're the 1 seed for a reason. It's going to take a lot for Memphis to come back and win this series.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think with getting Donovan Mitchell back, the Jazz have that scorer that can go toe-to-toe with Ja Morant every single night because now if Ja has another one of those 30-plus point games like he had when he went for 47, the Jazz aren't really at that severe disadvantage. Mitchell can carry them. Obviously, they have Clarkson, they have Ingles, they have Gobert on the defensive end. They're back at full strength. They're that consistent, like steady 1 seed, and they're gonna they're gonna show that they're that type of team throughout the series. I just wanted to highlight not even the series of itself, but John Morant's turning into one of the best point guards in the league. People continuously disrespect his 3-point jumper. He's starting to hit that now with more regularity. And the more times teams leave him open, he's going to keep hitting it. And I'm willing to bet that he's going to go this offseason and focus on that 3-point jumper. And if he gets that jumper down to where it is a consistent threat and he's going to hit it every single time, almost, he's going to be easily a top 5 or top 3 point guard in my mind in the league. And he's only going to get better from there. He has potential to be the best player in that draft class. And with RJ Barrett and Zion Williamson also playing to their very high potential, saying that is no joke. And I'm very excited to see not just Morant, but that entire class continue to blossom.
Yeah, very, very well said. And now moving on to the next one, Clippers and Mavericks. This is 2-0 Dallas, which it's very unusual to see the team on the road win the first 2 games of the series of any seeding. So it's 2-0 Dallas. They're playing right now in Dallas. The game is tied in the third quarter, so that one can still go either way. But what I've seen from this series so far that's really been interesting to me is, I mean, Luka, we knew that he had potential to be a star, and I think he's really showing it. I mean, the Clippers have Kawhi and Paul George, and you'd think that would be a tough matchup for any young guard / forward like Luka. And it's funny, it seems like he continually gets switches to go up Patrick Beverly, who is one of like the self-proclaimed really good defenders in his eyes. But as Russell Westbrook once said, he doesn't guard anybody. He just fouls you. He doesn't actually guard anybody. He's in your heads. That's what Russell said once. It's starting to look like Russell has a point. Luka is going at this guy every time. I don't know if you saw the highlights of him yelling at Patrick Beverly that he's too small. No one yells at Patrick Beverly. And I mean, he's earned it. He's killed him in this series. And even with Kawhi scoring 41 the other night, with Paul George scoring 28, like, it just never felt like it was the Clippers game. And Luka has really been the guy. And Tim Hardaway Jr., he's been a big piece. He's the piece that Porzingis really hasn't been. You'd think Porzingis would be that guy that would score 20, maybe even 30 points on a night where you need it. Tim Hardaway Jr. has picked up that slack, and I think that's another like huge point for them, because we know Luka can get you that 30, 40-point triple-double every night, but you can just get one other guy. That's Tim Hardaway Jr. has been the guy. And I just think it's really funny that the Clippers tanked their last couple of games to avoid playing the Lakers in round 2, and now they might not even make it to round 2. But very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the Clippers are getting what they deserve, to put it to put it lightly. I mean, oh yeah, we're gonna avoid the Lakers. I mean, I bet Luka and the Mavs took offense to that. It's like, oh, you want to play us? Like, okay,
Yeah.
let's make this a series. And it makes me smile as a Knicks fan that Porzingis isn't being the superstar that he tried to basically say he was. I mean, obviously you hate to see guys get injured anytime, but that injury has sapped some of that athleticism. And it's really ironic to see Tim Hardaway Jr. be the best piece of that trade when he was nowhere close to the player he is now in New York. Both stints, by the way. Like, he was not that caliber player either time when the Knicks drafted him or when they've re-signed him back. But I really want to focus on the Clippers for a second, because just speculating here, right? If by some chance the Clippers lose this series 4-0 or 4-2 or 4-1, I mean, is it far-fetched to say that Kawhi Leonard could be gone, maybe in a Heat uniform or a Knicks uniform, or, I mean, Clippers fans would hate to see this, but a Lakers uniform? I mean, right? Like, the Clippers literally mortgaged their future to get Paul George because that was the only way they were getting Kawhi Leonard. As a result, the Oklahoma City Thunder have like 13 first-round draft picks in like the next 5 years. or 10 years or whatever the number is, right? The Clippers got bounced last year, and the Clippers could end up getting bounced this year. So a team that was self-proclaimed, oh, we're the new kings of LA, we're going to overtake the city. And the Lakers already won a championship, and they haven't even made it to the conference finals yet. How fast do we expect Clippers not to clear house, but basically have to clear house because Kawhi is going to leave, and then you have to rely on what's his nickname? Oh yeah, Pandemic P to lead your team to the promised land. What Luke? Do you think that's a possibility? Do you think that their future is murky? Because I think personally, and getting into my opinion, obviously we don't know what's going to happen. I don't want to solidify my stance on anything until their season ends. But if the Clippers don't get far enough, I think Kawhi Leonard is good as gone, because I think he sees the writing on the wall. He sees that this just isn't working out here. I think he's gone, and after that, I think that's the ember that's gonna spark the fire. That's really just gonna burn everything down into a rebuild for the Clippers, who won't even be able to rebuild properly because they traded all those draft picks for Paul George. So, what is going on with the second team in LA?
Yeah, if they lose the series, he's gone. Like I just looked it up. He's 29 right now. Kawhi Leonard's not going to go into his 30s with a team that make it out of the first round. And I still think he can be the best player on a winning team, but because he still showed he can score 40 with elite defense any night you need it. And I think that's why he can be the number one guy. But I think it's just not going to happen here. If they lose this series, then he's as good as gone. And I mean, then if you're the Clippers, you're only rebuilding chip, hoping you can trade Paul George for as many assets as you can, which you're not going to get even close to the return on your original investment for what they did with Oklahoma City. So they are in a very tough spot because they're a team with a lot of veterans. So it's not like you're going to get value for those guys either. Like Pat Beverly, like Batum, like they just have a lot of older Marquise Morris is one of the Morrises. But like these are guys that can contribute to winning teams. But these aren't guys that teams are going to dole out a ton of draft picks or high level talent to acquire. Like if Kawhi leaves, they're in a very tough spot, and you can't fault them for going all in for the guy that just went on one of the best runs ever and won a championship for a place that has had no playoff success in Toronto. But it happened. They're struggling. Yeah, it's tough, and I agree. I think he leaves if we lose this series. That's where I'll leave it.
Oh, and just to
But
add one more thing to that. Remember in that trade, they also traded Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who would have been their main
yeah, good
trade
point.
chip and probably would have helped them win a lot more games. Then again, that trade probably doesn't get done without him in it. But to think that they gave up Gilgeous-Alexander, Chris Paul, and all those draft picks, could that go down as one of the worst NBA trades? Is that kind of the is that, I mean, depending obviously how the Thunder handle it, could that be the NBA's version of the what's the Dallas trade called? Was it the train robbery? Basically, what they call it, it's the Herschel Walker trade that got them Troy Aikman, Michael Irvin, and led to their success. But I mean, I think that could end up being the NBA's version of it, especially if the Clippers have 0 to none any playoff success.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to look really bad if they lose this series. But moving on from the Clippers' failures to the Blazers and Nuggets series, another team in the Blazers that if they struggle to win this series, you have to think maybe do they start going in different directions? They've had the same core for about 4 or 5 years now, and they haven't won anything. Right now, it's the Nuggets lead this series 2-1. The Nuggets, who I thought were going to get knocked off, not having Jamal Murray, not having another one of their backup point guards that I can't remember right now, but they're playing Austin Rivers and Facundo Campazzo, guys that were not big on their team. They acquired Austin Rivers towards the end of the season. He was a Knick, correct me if I'm wrong, at the beginning of the season. So he was not with this team for a majority of the year. And hey, they've come out and done it. Austin Rivers had about 4 or 5 huge 3-pointers in the fourth quarter to help win game 3. And that was probably what I was concerned about the most. Jokic is probably going to win the MVP. You know how good he is, but did the Nuggets have a second guy? And it seems like with Aaron Gordon, everybody else all chipping in enough to win. And even with Dame, McCollum, Melo, Rocco, I mean, the Blazers are healthy. We always heard they just needed to be healthy, and now they're healthy, and they're still struggling. I haven't gotten to watch too much of this series, I'll be honest. So I don't really have a big reason as to why the Nuggets are winning, other than the role players are contributing. And the Blazers are going to be at home again for game 4. So you can certainly see them turn around and tie this series up. But it's been a close one, but it's been in the Nuggets' favor, and you got to give props to Jokic. I didn't know if he had it in him.
You're gonna think I'm crazy because I never do this, but I want to really just I kind of want to hold my breath with this one. I just like I don't know because it's like the Blazers are so talented that they could flip this series on its head, but also Denver could easily take a commanding 3-1 series lead in the next game and put Portland on its heels. I'm so like wishy-washy with it because these are two very talented teams, but I'm leaning a little more Denver because they show that their role players will actually be able to step up and actually be able to have an impact. Obviously, Portland did so too because they competed down the stretch. I mean, I think this is the best series after the Atlanta Hawks New York Knicks one. And like I said with that one, I think I expect this one to go 6 or 7. I really do. Unless something drastic happens in the next game in the series, I really expect that this is going to be a closely contested and tight ball game.
Yeah, I agree. This is a series that we're definitely looking forward to see how it ends up. But moving on to our final series of the night, the Lakers and the Suns. And this one has just completely flipped on its head for all the wrong reasons. I mean, we wanted this to be a good series, but not at the expense of Chris Paul being injured. And that's really what's happened. The Suns came out, won game 1 pretty definitively. I mean, the Lakers struggled. We were expecting them to bounce back, but not due to a Chris Paul injury. And that's really what's happened. The Lakers have ripped off 2 straight wins, barring that injury. And Chris Paul, he's tried to play in both games, but you could tell he's not the same. Cam Payne has actually played during crunch time a lot, and he's played really well. Like, you got to give Cam Payne so much credit that he was not supposed to be in this spot playing instead of one of the best point guards of all time. And he's held his own, but there's no substitute. There's no substitute for the guy that took you from out of the playoffs season to go to the second best record in the entire NBA. It's really unfortunate that it's gone this way. And the Lakers, I mean, they're doing what they should do. With no Chris Paul, this was a realistic series to see the other way. If the Lakers had been healthy and the Suns didn't acquire Chris Paul this offseason, we saw they got hot at the end of last year. It was realistic to think maybe they could make an end of the postseason run. So that's kind of what it feels like right now. With no Chris Paul, it feels like the Lakers are really the 2 seed and the Suns are really the 7 seed. And it feels so disrespectful to say that about the Suns because they've been so good this year. But like, there's just nothing you can say. I mean, Devin Booker is good when he's always good. But when you have Chris Paul, then he can be himself. He can be a scorer now. Without Chris Paul, he's got to be the leader. He's got to be the playmaker. That's just not where he's at yet. I just don't think they can do it without him being 100% because he can't even finish these games. They're saying he's active and then he just can't make it through.
If you remember, right, last week, what was the main thing we said about the Suns and that team in general? Chris Paul, that acquisition, elevated that team so much that now I expect the Suns to be a force in the West for years to come because he showed them the way. He is that guiding person, that leader with that high basketball IQ that's going to rub off on Phoenix. I think he's rubbed off on Campaign, Booker, Aiden. Aiden's now like a double machine all of a sudden. He's fulfilling his potential. He's one of the main reasons why I think the Suns are going to be a force to be reckoned with in years to come. With that being said, with how much of an impact Paul had this year, that injury, like you said, it completely flipped the series on its head. LeBron smelled blood in the water, and now he's playing to his capabilities, which, you know what? I don't think he's even playing at 100%. You can tell the injury's still bothering him a little bit. He's not attacking the rim with as much regularity as you would expect from playoff LeBron, who's not completely clinched the series yet. AD, yeah, he's playing a lot better, but he's still having these stretches where he's missing all these shots. And Contavious Caldwell Pope, absolutely terrible right now. Kyle Kuzma, brutal. Caruso, average. Listen, I think even if the Lakers make it out of this series, yes, they have all the playoff experience in the world. I am not even considering them the favorite to win the championship or maybe even get out of the West. I think I really think Utah could give them a run for their money. I think one of these other teams could give them a run for their money. And that's not saying that I don't believe in LeBron or Anthony Davis or I don't believe in this Lakers team. I just think they're not having the level of production they need out of their role players. And LeBron and AD are nowhere near 100%.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is very clear that LeBron's not all there. I mean, he even in the wins, there were some games where he's scoring like 18, 20 points, and that's just not what you see from LeBron, especially in the years that we've seen LeBron carry his teams to titles, where he's putting up like 40-point triple doubles every other night. And you can take off a little bit when you have Anthony Davis, but not at this level and not at this point. When you're a 7 seed, you're going to be going on the road for a lot of games. But yeah, that's it for us for the playoff series. Now we're going to move on to one last thing for the NBA before we get to our book picks of the week. The award winners. We've only had 2 so far. We've had the Sixth Man of the Year, which is Jordan Clarkson. Julius Randle won Most Improved. We talked about it a bit last week before they were awarded. I'll give it to you in a second, Brandon. Something that I just really enjoyed is how they're giving these awards. I mean, for the Sixth Man one, I thought it was really cool having Clarkson and Ingles sit down together and Joe turn over and like say, "Hey, you're the Sixth Man of the Year," and he goes and gives him the trophy on TV. Like I thought that was really cool. And then obviously Julius Randle's son getting to give his dad Julius Randle the award at practice, like that was really cool. And I hope when they name the rest of the awards, they can do something along the lines of those because those have just been really cool to see. And 2 very deserving guys. I think we agreed they were the favorite.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's more genuine, it's more personal. It's not some award show where it feels distant, like a place we can never be at. Like we can all, I feel like a lot of adults could relate to their kid giving them something. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to one of their teammates giving them an award and understand like, oh, it's so much, it's like so much of a better story. And those 2 guys, Clarkson and Randall, they both deserve those awards. They're both very high quality basketball players, and I expect them to keep performing in the playoffs, or in Randall's case, to start playing to his capabilities, what we all know he can do. But on that note, NBA series, their first round is going to be coming down to the wire at the end of this week. Stay locked and loaded to the podcast for all your NBA news, analysis, and predictions going forward. And on that note, it's time for Book It Picks of the Week. We're keeping it nice and short this week. Just simple 2 picks out of each of us. NBA playoffs, not a lot of high stakes sports going on right now outside of the NHL and NBA playoffs, but I didn't think it'd be fair to cover NHL or not cover NHL and then give Book It picks. So we're going to be sticking to NBA. So I'm going to start off with my picks. I have the Milwaukee Bucks covering a 4.6 favorite spread. That means that Milwaukee is slated to win by basically 5 points tomorrow. Listen, Milwaukee has dominated this series. I think even with the loss of DiVincenzo, the life is just sucked out of Miami. Unless Jimmy Butler can get them to rally behind him and put up a fight where he hasn't done that in the first 3 games of the series, I think Milwaukee's winning this one with ease. I think they're winning by 10 or more. I don't think it's going to be close. I think Miami's going to mail it in because they got no shot at this series. I'm sorry. It's just point blank. It's the facts at this point. And that's that. My second pick, I'm taking the over in the 76ers and Wizards game. I am not saying this because I think it'll be a close game. I think the Sixers will take a commanding 3-0 lead. I'm just saying this because in a series with Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook, and then Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris, and the high-octane Sixers offense, I think the Sixers are going to continuously score on a average to below average Washington defense. And I think that Beal and Westbrook, and specifically Westbrook, if he plays, are going to get a lot of garbage time buckets and just inflate that score to more than what it actually is. I think the Sixers will have no problem winning this game, but the score is just going to be a lot higher and make the Sixers seem like they played a lot worse. But I think a 227.6 spread, I think that's an easy over between these two teams. So those are my book it picks of the week. Luke, what do you got?
I like to hear it. So I'm starting off with a money line parlay, and I think the good thing about the playoffs, once you get through the series a bit, you can really start to see how things are playing out, and it can make these types of things a little easier and make me a little more confident. So I'm taking the Sixers and the Bucks money line, which actually goes to plus 117. And those are teams that I'm very confident in. They've shown no signs of progressing so far. It doesn't seem like being on the road is going to affect either of them tomorrow. I think they're just going to win both of their games pretty easily. I don't expect either to be close. And I think at plus 117 odds, I think that's pretty good. I know it's always a parlay is never guaranteed because it's always relying on more things, but I'm feeling confident about this one. So you can book it. There's money line, Bucks money line. It's a parlay. You can book it. And for my second pick, I got my series one wrong on our last book it pick because I predicted a Nets sweep, a Nets Celtics series going under 4.5 games. Celtics just won tonight, so it's going 5. But I'm going right back to the well. Lakers and Suns, I'm going under 5.5 games. Still available right now, I think, and it's about minus 110. It's right around there, so which is still pretty. It's good. I like that. I like the value. I just think I don't see any way Chris Paul gets to playable healthiness anytime soon. Like the playoffs, everything just happens so fast. Like there's no time to rest and actually recover. I think he's probably going to play in the next game, and I think he's probably not going to finish the game because he's a fighter. He's a trooper. I think he's going to find himself on the court, but he's just going to feel like he's not helping his team. And we're just going to see campaign at the end of the game again. And I think without a healthy Chris Paul, even the Lakers with their role players struggling, with LeBron and AD not at 100%, that's still going to be enough. I don't think Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, as good as they've played this season, I don't think they have enough to take a game on this winning champion Lakers team. So you can book it, Lakers Suns, under 5.5 games.
Let's see if this scorching hot take can reverse the jinx that Luke put on himself with the Nets series. But on that note, thank you for listening to another episode of the Big Apple and Broad Street Sports Podcast. Make sure to stay tuned to our social media channels, that being Twitter and Instagram. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube page and make sure to listen on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Anchor, Google Podcast, or wherever you can find podcasts. We got another fun weekend of sports coming up. And we'll be sure to catch you guys next week. So for Luke Milai and myself, thank you guys for tuning in to another fun and great episode. And we'll catch you next time.